Dante Alighieri spent his life in Florence, the same city, the same streets, the same stone bridges over the Arno as the family we are about to talk about. And in his masterwork, The Divine Comedy, Dante reserved one of hell's most vivid punishments for a specific type of sinner, not murderers, not tyrants, moneylenders. In Dante's Inferno, usurers, people who lent money at interest, sat on burning sand in the seventh circle of hell, their eyes fixed on pouches of coins hanging from their necks, suffering for eternity. The Medici were moneylenders. Under canon law, what they did was a mortal sin. Every priest in Florence knew it. Every merchant knew it. The Medici themselves knew it. So how did a family of condemned usurers end up financing the Renaissance, producing 4 popes, placing 2 queens on the French throne, and building a financial system that still runs the world today? The answer is not in the paintings hanging on museum walls. It is not in Botticelli's Venus or Michelangelo's David. The answer is in something far less romantic and far more powerful. It is in the ledgers. Here is what most history channels will not tell you. The word bank comes from the Italian word banca, meaning bench or table, specifically the green cloth-covered tables in Florence's market squares, where money changers weighed coins and recorded transactions. Humble wooden tables. That is where modern finance was born. The Medici did not just use those tables. They reinvented what a table could do. They turned a piece of furniture into a throne. This video is not a story about art, or popes, or Florentine politics, though we will touch all of those. This is a story about financial power, how it is built, how it is weaponized, and how it collapses. And no family in history demonstrates all 3 better than the Medici. If you are new here, this channel sits at the intersection of history and finance. If that is the kind of content you want more of, hit subscribe and leave a like right now. It genuinely helps the channel grow. Now, let's get into it. Let's start at the beginning. And the beginning is not glamorous. Giovanni di Bicci de Medici was born in 1360 into a family that had money, but not much of it. His father died young, leaving a modest estate to be split among 5 sons. Giovanni's share was small. There was no inheritance that made him great, no title, no political position. He started as an apprentice in a relative's bank. He learned the craft from the floor up. When he married Picarda Bueri, her dowry, 1,500 florins, became his seed capital. He eventually took over a branch office in Rome, then struck out on his own. In 1397, he officially founded the Medici Bank in Florence. On paper, nothing about Giovanni screamed dynasty. He was careful, quiet, and deeply private. He actively avoided public attention. In the modern sense, he was a brilliant operator who understood one thing clearly. In a world of kings, cardinals, and mercenary soldiers, information and liquidity were more powerful than swords. And in the early 1400s, an extraordinary opportunity walked through his door. The Catholic Church was in crisis, not a small crisis, an existential one. There were 3 men simultaneously claiming to be the rightful pope, one in Rome, one in Avignon, one in Pisa. They had all excommunicated each other. Christendom was split. The institution that functioned as medieval Europe's largest multinational corporation was leaderless. Into this chaos walked a man named Baldassare Cosa. Born in Naples to a minor noble family, he turned to piracy in the Mediterranean as a young man, and was apparently very good at it. He made enough from plundering ships to fund a law degree at the University of Bologna. He climbed the church hierarchy with ruthless speed. By 1402, he was a cardinal. Contemporary sources described him as a man of 0 spiritual qualities, accused of murder, heresy, and seducing hundreds of women in Bologna. He was, in every measurable sense, the worst possible candidate to lead the Catholic Church, and Giovanni di Bicci decided to invest in him. Cosa needed 10,000 gold ducats to bribe cardinals and buy his way into the papacy. The loan was enormous. It was unsecured. The borrower was a former pirate. Any rational risk assessment said, "Do not make this loan." Giovanni made it anyway. He spent 8 years financing Cossa's rise. And in 1410, Baldassare Cosa was elected Pope, taking the name John the 23rd. The return on that investment was immediate and astronomical. The new Pope appointed the Medici Bank as official manager of the Vatican Treasury. In modern terms, the Medici Bank had just become the CFO of the world's largest religious institution. Think about what the medieval Catholic Church was as a financial entity. It had branches in every corner of Europe. Tithes, indulgences, donations, and church taxes flowed in from millions of believers. All of that money now passed through Medici Bank branches before reaching Rome. The Rome branch alone was generating annual returns of approximately 30% on invested capital. More than half of the entire Medici Bank's profit came from papal business. When Cosa was later arrested and thrown in a German prison, Giovanni paid 38,000 ducats to free him. It was ruinously expensive. But that reputation for loyalty brought the next legitimate pope directly to the Medici Bank. The investment in credibility paid compound interest for decades. That is how you build a financial dynasty, not by being the smartest person in the room, by being the most reliable one. Giovanni died in 1429, passing the bank to his son Cosimo. And Cosimo de Medici is where the story gets genuinely dangerous. Cosimo inherited a bank. What he built was something closer to a state within a state. Florence, in the 15th century, was technically a republic. It had councils, guilds, elected magistrates, no king, no official ruler. Cosimo never gave himself a formal title. He attended meetings, paid taxes, and lived in a palazzo deliberately less grand than he could afford. And yet, he controlled everything. The proof came in 1433. Florence had been fighting an expensive, losing war against Lucca. The treasury was bankrupt. Cosimo's rivals, the Albizzi family, had him arrested, tried for treason, and exiled from the city. Their goal was his permanent removal. What they did not understand was what they were actually exiling. When Cosimo left for Venice, he did not go empty-handed. He took the bank's liquidity, the capital, the credit lines, the international banking relationships, all of it moved with him. What followed in Florence is a textbook capital flight crisis. International banks stopped extending credit to Florentine merchants. Payments seized up. Merchants could not settle contracts. Unemployment rose. The commercial engine of one of Europe's wealthiest cities stalled because the man who provided its financial oxygen had left. Within 12 months, the Albizzi collapsed. A new council was elected. And in 1434, Cosimo de Medici was officially invited back to Florence. He returned not as an exile. He returned as the city's savior. Back in power, Cosimo developed 3 financial weapons that defined his rule. The first, sovereign lending. He provided the state with wartime loans at interest rates of around 33% per year. As he himself said, "Ask your soldiers how many times I paid them from my own pocket when the commune could not." When you are the lender of last resort to a government, that government's appointments, its policies, its laws, all of it aligns with your interests. Because debt has gravity. The second weapon was the catasto, Florence's tax registry. Officials assessed citizens' wealth and assigned tax bills. Under Cosimo, those officials answered to him. And the assessments reflected loyalty, not market value. The clearest example, Giovanni Medici was one of Florence's most celebrated scholars, a diplomat, a statesman of extraordinary reputation. He criticized Cosimo's foreign policy. Tax officials arrived at his door with a bill of 135,000 gold florins, a sum exceeding the net worth of Florence's wealthiest families. It was not a tax. It was a sentence. Medici abandoned everything and fled to Naples. He died in poverty, no sword required, just a tax official and a number in a ledger. The third weapon was direct credit control. Merchants who relied on Medici credit lines understood, without anyone saying it aloud, that opposing Cosimo carried financial risk. Credit could be recalled. A business that lost its Medici relationship could not trade internationally. Cosimo had turned a bank into a governing apparatus. Florence looked like a republic. It functioned like a Medici subsidiary. Now we need to talk about how the bank actually worked. Because the financial engineering inside the Medici operation was, by any standard, extraordinary. The fundamental problem was this: the church explicitly prohibited usury. Canon lawyers had a formulation: whatever exceeds the principal is usury. In practice, you could not write a contract saying, "I lend you 1,000 florins at 12% interest." That was a sin, potentially a crime. The Medici solution was the bill of exchange, the lettera di cambio, and it was a work of financial genius. Here's how it worked. A Florentine merchant needs capital to buy English wool. He walks into the Medici Bank in Florence and receives 1,000 florins. But the contract does not say loan. It says currency exchange. He signs a document instructing the Medici's London branch to pay the equivalent in sterling at a fixed rate of 40 pence per florin in 90 days. 90 days later, in London, he pays 40,000 pence. The London branch then needs to send that money back to Florence. So they buy a new bill of exchange at the current rate, which happens to be 36 pence per florin. 40,000 pence divided by 36 gives you 1,111 florins. The bank started with 1,000 florins. It ended with 1,111. That 111 florin difference was interest. Technically, legally, theologically, it was a currency exchange spread. The church accepted this because canonists had ruled, exchange is not a loan. The Medici had hidden interest inside geography and time. Nobody charged interest. The math did it automatically. Alongside this, the bank pioneered double-entry bookkeeping on a massive scale. Every transaction recorded in 2 columns, debit and credit. Combined with Arabic numerals and cheap paper, this allowed the Medici to track hundreds of accounts across dozens of cities with unprecedented precision. But the most consequential innovation was structural. In 1340, 2 of Florence's largest banks, Bardi and Peruzzi, collapsed simultaneously. Both had lent to Edward III of England, who defaulted. Because both were single centralized companies, when London went bad, everything failed. Thousands lost everything. Giovanni and Cosimo studied that failure carefully, and they built something different. The Medici Bank was not a single company. It was a holding structure. Each branch in London, Bruges, Geneva, and Lyons was a legally independent partnership, separately capitalized, with its own balance sheet. If the London branch failed, it could not legally drag down Florence or Bruges. The risk was fenced. This principle, isolating subsidiaries to protect the parent company, is exactly what regulators imposed on major banks after the 2008 financial crisis. The Medici invented it in the 1400s. And to solve the problem of branch managers gambling with other people's money, they created incentive contracts. Managers were required to invest their own capital in the branch they ran. When the Venice branch contract was renewed in 1455, manager Alessandro Martelli put in 2,000 of his own ducats out of a total capital base of 14,000. In return, despite owning roughly 1/7 of the capital, he received 1/5 of the profits. His upside was disproportionate to incentivize performance. His personal money was at risk to prevent recklessness. This is a stock option structure. It is exactly how modern investment banks compensate senior partners. The Medici built it 6 centuries ago. Here is what popular history usually says about Lorenzo de Medici. He was a great patron of the arts. He spent too much on Botticelli and Michelangelo, and eventually the bank ran out of money. That version is wrong, or, at best, dangerously incomplete. The bank's destruction came from 3 simultaneous failures, and none of them were primarily about art. The first failure was sovereign debt. The London branch, under pressure to maintain the lucrative English wool trade, extended massive unsecured credit to King Edward IV and various factions in the Wars of the Roses. When Edward defaulted, the branch was left holding uncollectible debts of approximately 51,500 gold florins. The English crown had no intention of repaying it. There was no court the Medici could appeal to. There was no enforcement mechanism against a king with an army. This is the eternal trap of sovereign lending. Ordinary debtors can be sued, have their assets seized, be expelled from their guild. A sovereign debtor can simply say no. In 1478, the London branch was liquidated at a catastrophic loss. The second failure was a textbook principal agent collapse, and it happened in Bruges. Tommaso Portinari was the Medici's branch manager in Bruges, the financial capital of Northern Europe. He was talented, ambitious, and deeply interested in one thing that had nothing to do with the bank's health: his personal status at the Burgundian court. Portinari lent Charles the Bold, Duke of Burgundy, sums that exceeded the branch's entire capitalized equity. He extended credit the Duke clearly could not repay, because doing so gave Portinari a seat on the Duke's council. Portinari received the upside, prestige, and social access. When Charles the Bold died in battle in 1477, bankrupt and at war, the losses arrived in Florence, more than 70,000 gold florins. Lorenzo had not been auditing the branches. The oversight system Cosimo had maintained with disciplined regularity had quietly decayed. By the time anyone in Florence understood the exposure, the damage was done. The Bruges branch closed in 1478, the same year as London. The third failure was the most damaging. To cover the bank's liquidity crisis, Lorenzo diverted money from public funds, specifically from Florence's state debt fund and from a dowry fund that ordinary Florentine families paid into to secure their daughters' futures. This was not a financial mistake. It was a crime. When Pope Sixtus IV discovered the depth of the Medici Bank's weakness, he transferred the Vatican's accounts to the Medici Bank, the Medici's chief rivals. That financial blow provided the backing for what happened in April 1478, when members of the Medici family attacked Lorenzo and his brother Giuliano inside Florence Cathedral during High Mass. Giuliano was killed. Lorenzo survived, but the bank never recovered. By 1494, when the French king invaded Italy and the Florentines rose against the Medici, there was almost nothing left of the financial empire. The branches were closed. The capital was gone. The empire built with ledgers and compound interest was destroyed by reckless sovereign lending, unsupervised managers, and a leadership that had confused prestige with solvency. The Medici Bank was formally dissolved in 1494. But here's the thing about financial infrastructure: the institution can fail while the technology it created survives. Every innovation the Medici developed is still running today, not metaphorically, mechanically. The bill of exchange, that instrument designed to hide interest inside a currency transaction across two cities, is the direct ancestor of the modern letter of credit. Right now, somewhere in the world, an importer is handing their bank a letter of credit so that a factory in another country will start production before payment clears. The mechanism is identical. Money moves as information before it moves as value. That idea was born on a green cloth-covered table in Florence. The holding structure, separately capitalized subsidiaries with risk fenced from the parent, is the organizing principle of every major multinational corporation on Earth. When regulators in 2010 forced banks to create ring-fenced retail subsidiaries after the financial crisis, they were reinventing a solution the Medici had already engineered 580 years earlier. The stock option structure, giving managers ownership stakes to align their incentives with the firm's long-term health, is the same mechanism Cosimo used with his branch managers in the 1450s. And the art, the cathedral dome, the bronze David, the church renovations and libraries, those were not acts of pure cultural generosity. Today, oil companies fund climate research to manage reputational risk. Technology monopolies endow university chairs. Pharmaceutical firms sponsor hospital wings. They do this because being seen as a civic contributor is worth real money in regulatory goodwill and political access. The field is called ESG, environmental, social, and governance investment. Cosimo de Medici was running the 15th century version of an ESG program. The guilt of usury was real, theologically, legally, socially. The art bought tolerance. The church renovations bought absolution. The libraries bought legitimacy. It was a public relations budget, a very beautiful, very expensive, genuinely world-changing public relations budget. But a budget. The Medici did not build the Renaissance out of love. They built it out of strategy. And then it became love. And then it changed the world. Here is the actual lesson. Power, real durable power, has almost never lived where it looks like it lives. It did not live in the swords of Florence's soldiers. It lived in Cosimo's credit ledgers. It did not live in the church's theological authority. It lived in the Medici's management of church cash flows. Money is not just a store of value. In the hands of people who understand it, money is infrastructure. It is the thing that makes all other things possible or impossible. The Medici proved that a family without land, without noble blood, without an army, could, through a sufficiently sophisticated understanding of credit, liquidity, and financial architecture, bend the trajectory of Western civilization. The bank collapsed. The dynasty ended in 1737 without male heirs. But the tools they built, those are still here. And if you made it to the end of this video, you already understand finance better than most people. If you want more content at the intersection of history and money, subscribe to the channel and leave a like. It helps more than you think. See you in the next one.